The new player's handbook saw a lot of changes to some of the core spells in the game, including several of the cantrips. Some got a lot more powerful, while others saw their power reduced, and a few new cantrips were added to the game or added to the player's handbook.
So as we set out making new characters and going on new adventures with these rules, what damage-dealing cantrips should we be focusing on and picking up for our characters? There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling. This week's episode is sponsored by Sheipeku and their brand new tokens. We've been a huge fan of Sheipeku's maps for a long time, and now they're branching out so that if you are using their maps in your VTTs already, like we are, then you may want some tokens to go along with that. And their tokens are amazing because they're completely customizable.
As Kelly said, Sheipeku has long been our absolute favorite for getting great tactical maps for your virtual tabletops. And of course, if you want some matching tokens to move around on those beautiful, beautiful maps, you're really going to want to check out their new token builder. It's a new subscription that you can get that adds over 20 new tokens every month that you can use for your fantasy games on your VTTs, adding 5 new tokens every week for all subscribers. But at their higher subscription tier, you can actually fully customize the tokens, creating different variations of each token. And I find, when you're doing an encounter where you've got like 6 bugbears, you want to have some different variations on there to really create the scene, especially when you're using such beautiful maps from Sheipeku.
I really like playing around with the creator. You could take like the bugbear face and be like, I want a different shirt or haircut or whatever. You can actually mix and match the colors, whatever makes it easier for you. I know that as a DM for years, if I had minis out, I would write like troll with axe, troll with sword, but like it really helps to have a slight differentiation in your tokens so that you know which ones at which hit points and so forth and so on, and who's doing what. And it also just brings some personality. You might be flipping through the tokens and be like, okay, this bugbear has a mohawk, so that's their personality now. And you might bring them to life in a new way. I find it very inspiring.
So if you want to give a demo of their awesome token builder before you sign up, follow the links down below because the demo is a really great way to see everything that you're going to get with the subscription. And then you get access, once you do subscribe, you get access to their full back catalog with new tokens coming out every week. Best of all, the tokens work with your VTT of choice, whether you're on Roll20 or Foundry or otherwise. You'll be able to download the tokens, put them into your favorite VTT, and know that they will just work.
So check the links below and make sure to check out Sheipeku's tokens. And if you haven't checked out Sheipeku's maps, you should check those out as well because they're amazing. And now let's start talking about this week's episode.
Now, there's a lot of contenders for the best damage-dealing cantrip in D&D 5e, and with new feats like Magic Initiate really opening up the ability to pilfer your favorite cantrips from the Wizard, Druid, or Cleric spell list, it's much easier than ever before to get whatever cantrip you want on whatever character that you're playing. Although getting warlock cantrips has become a little bit harder. We'll put a pin in that one though for now. And so we've also seen a bunch of other cantrips that got upgraded or changed or added to the game.
So in D&D 2024, Acid Splash, Poison Spray, and True Strike all got significantly upgraded. We also saw the introduction of Sorcerous Burst and Starry Wisp as brand new cantrips, and Toll the Dead and Mind Sliver were added to the player's handbook. They were previously added in later books in the 2014 version, but now they're here in the core book.
Now, the benchmark for damage-dealing cantrips has always been, in our opinion, Firebolt and Eldritch Blast. Firebolt just hits that real kind of core niche of it just does damage, it lets you pick up a bunch of d10s, it's got the big 120-foot range, it's based on an attack roll, not a saving throw. And in general, attack rolls are stronger longer because monsters' saving throws tend to scale up faster than their AC does. The downside, of course, of Firebolt is that it's fire damage, which is one of the most resisted damage types in the entire game.
But Firebolt has always just been a reliable cantrip and a lot of people's go-to. So we're kind of using Firebolt. You'll hear us reference it a lot in this video because for us, Firebolt is the benchmark that sort of sets the bar for where we want our damage-dealing cantrips to land.
Yeah, we're looking for something that's better than Firebolt, basically.
On the other hand, Eldritch Blast has always sort of been the premier best cantrip in the game. Now, mind you, Eldritch Blast, there's two conversations to have with that. Number one, it's the best cantrip in the game. It does the most damage. You get to fire it multiple times. It's an incredible cantrip. But on the other hand, it is only available to warlocks, and it is somewhat challenging for characters who aren't warlocks to get their hands on it. There are ways to do that with multi-classing and other such things, so it's
But
not
then you're a warlock at that point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like they pretty much the Magic Initiate used to be one of the ways that you could grab Eldritch Blast without having to take Warlock levels. That doesn't work anymore. Spell Sniper also doesn't work anymore. So you actually do have to multi-class into Warlock to grab Eldritch Blast.
So Eldritch Blast remains one of the most valuable and best cantrips in the game, but you might hear us reference it as well when we're talking about other cantrips to say, is it better than Firebolt? Is it as good as Eldritch Blast? Usually the answer is going to be no, but again, is it available to more classes than Eldritch Blast? Then it's probably a pretty good pickup. So with all that being said, let's take a look at some of the math, the damage output, and the in-game usability that you can find with the cantrips in 2024. We're going to go over all of the damage-dealing cantrips. Some we're not going to have much to talk about, but others we're going to have a lot to talk about. So let's go ahead.
So Acid Splash is one of the first ones that I've started to look at more for more of my characters in 2024 because it now has a 60-foot range. It's an AoE based on a dexterity saving throw. And it's only a 5-foot AoE, but that's still significant. Very few enemies are resistant to acid. And it's one of those places where, like, if you're playing an Evoker Wizard and you want that potent cantrip enabler, it's there for you, and it will hit more than one enemy as long as they're right next to each other. So I think that Acid Splash kind of is in this unique position where it is the best AoE damage dealing cantrip in the game, although it is kind of the only one.
Well, we used to have, it used to be that the only way you could do AoE damage was something like, what was it, Thunderous Burst?
Yeah,
But that's the one that's like around you.
Yeah, Thunderclap.
Thunderclap.
Yeah.
And that was always a little bit of a dangerous situation. We talked about that a lot, where being surrounded is not ideal. So having an AoE around you is not actually ideal either. But a ranged AoE is something that we've actually never seen in the cantrip. So this improvement to Acid Splash takes Acid Splash from a place where it was overlooked a lot in the 2014 rules. We didn't look at it much, to now being probably one of the top contenders for damage-dealing cantrips. Again, it's not the biggest AoE, but it's a free cantrip. It's a cantrip. You don't have to spend a spell slot, and it might damage more than one enemy, and that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I think in that respect, it's still, you only want to take it if you're going to hit more than one target. With it. It's not ideal if you're just trying to plink at one person, unless that single target happens to have resistances to your other damage types.
I think Acid Splash is great on a character who has the flexibility of having multiple cantrips and room to take 2 damage-dealing cantrips.
Yeah. Now, worth noting that if you want to draw a first comparison, 2 Eldritch Blast bolts shot at 2 separate targets is almost as good as those same targets being hit by Acid Splash. So at 5th level, when you can do 2 beams with Eldritch Blast, if you were firing each beam at a different target, it's a D10, so it's 5.5 damage on average. But of course, if you're a Warlock, you're adding your whole ability score modifier to that.
And they also don't need to be next to each other.
Yes. Whereas with Acid Splash, they have to be right beside each other, and it's 7 damage on average. So, like, even if you're talking about the notion of hitting 2 targets, which I think the best you're ever going to do with a 5-foot AoE with Acid Splash, like, there's going to be those exceptional cases where for some reason, like, you're down a tight hallway and you can hit 4 minions. But I think that's a case where those are going to be minions who die in 1 hit point anyways.
But if you can kill 4 of them.
Yeah, not bad.
Not bad.
But yeah, like but it's interesting that noting that, like, even when you're trying to hit 2 separate targets, Eldritch Blast still does a better job.
When it compares to Firebolt, though, here's what I'm imagining. In a situation where you are in a tight hallway, Acid Splash beats Firebolt. In most situations where you're not having groups of enemies hoarded together, Firebolt beats Acid Splash.
Yes. unless you're in a situation where you can use Firebolt to set something on fire.
Fair.
Yeah. Um, and cause like a a, a ranged hazard.
But that's
Yeah.
also a niche
Yeah.
circumstance. But my players have actually taught me through my own home games that I always thought that grouping enemies together was something that didn't happen a lot. Apparently, I, as a DM, have my enemies hoard together a lot more than I thought I did.
Mhm.
And my players have taught me that. So Acid Splash might be brutal against me as a DM. Moving on to Chill Touch, though. Chill Touch used to be a pretty good cantrip.
But now it actually touches instead of shoots people at range, which I think was the confusing part for it.
This is one of those be careful what you wish for, because I made the joke all the time. I'm like, why is Chill Touch a ranged spell and not a touch spell? So they made it a touch spell, and because of that, I probably won't take it
Yeah.
anymore.
Chill Touch, I really like Chill Touch because the secret sauce of Chill Touch was that it prevented enemies from regaining hit points. And it
Yeah.
still does that, and it does 1d10 damage. It used to also have this debuff when you use it against undead. It doesn't have that anymore. But yeah, Chill Touch used to be this really interesting way of I actually loved putting it on boss monsters and
Yes.
NPC spellcasters, because player characters not being able to heal in combat usually scares the pants off them.
And let's be real, it's still a good choice for boss monsters, and it's actually more interesting because now the boss has to come up to you
Yeah.
if you're like at 2 hit points and be like, haha, now you can't.
But like it's one of those things where like Chill Touch used to be this really interesting way at stopping regeneration,
Mhm.
or stopping monsters that would heal a lot of hit points in some way, shape, or form, and it still can do that, but it's a huge loss in utility when you have to be right up to them to touch them.
I think Chill Touch is not making my list of best damage dealing cantrips. It's gone down a bit. Next up is Mind Sliver. Mind Sliver is an interesting one to talk about. It does 1d6 damage on a failed intelligence saving throw, and it debuffs the target, giving them minus 1d4 against the next saving throw that they make. In terms of if this video is only talking about the best damage dealing cantrips, technically speaking, Mind Sliver is not the best at dealing damage. However, I think that this is a standout pick because of the debuff, and I think that it stands out more on certain characters than it does on others.
Yes.
The ability for a sorcerer to use Quicken Spell to combine both Mind Slivering a target and then hitting it with a spell that requires a saving throw, automatically giving it the minus d4 on the spell that they wanted to cast, is incredible. Mind Sliver in general, though, if you have 2 spellcasters in your party and one of you cantrips to hit them and then the next one drops something on them, it's a great double whammy. I think that Mind Sliver does that little bit of damage, and if you're here for the damage dealing, you're here for the wrong reasons, because it's that debuff that really sells Mind Sliver.
In defense of Mind Sliver as a damage dealing cantrip is the fact that psychic damage is very seldom resisted,
Yeah.
and intelligence saving throws are bad.
Yes.
So it is one of those spells that will very reliably land. And in saves are pretty, like, some monsters just have absolutely abysmal intelligence saving throws. And there's monsters that are resistant or immune to psychic damage are not unheard of, but it's a fraction of them. And usually, they're resistant to psychic damage because they have tentacles.
Yeah. Does it have tentacles? Don't use Mind Sliver. Yeah.
Yeah. Although there's lots of monsters that have tentacles that are not resistant to psychic damage. So is it purple? And does it have tentacles?
And is it reading your mind?
Then it's resistant to psychic damage.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do think that, yeah, that minus 1d4 saving throw thing could be the thing that lands another effect that does a lot of damage. So, but in terms of like, I am just spamming Mind Sliver. Well, because that's the other thing, is that if you're just spamming Mind Sliver on the target, it's also becoming more susceptible to subsequent saving throws that it makes against it. So it kind of has this reliability factor for it, but it won't do the most in absolute damage, and it doesn't have the ability to crit. Moving on to spells that would be really good if half the monster manual didn't have immunity to them. Poison Spray.
Poison Spray has improved here. It's got a 30-foot range. It's an attack roll. It does 1d12 damage, which of course goes up as you gain levels.
Yeah.
So on paper, wow, Poison Spray.
Yeah, this is the most damage on an attack roll cantrip by raw dice, unaugmented.
They could have made this like 4D. Okay, if they did make it 4D12, I might think about taking it. But
Yeah.
but still, the problem with
Okay.
poison spray.
Yeah. So it used to have a 10-foot range. Now it's 30 feet. So you start going, okay, how can we make this good? Take Spell Sniper, make the range 60 feet. Take the Poisoner feat, ignore resistance to poison damage.
Well, if we're ignoring resistance to poison damage, then this spell becomes amazing, right?
No, because here's why. There are 6 monsters out of the 500 plus in the 2024 Monster Manual that are resistant to poison damage. In contrast, there are something like 120 that are flat out immune. And the Poisoner feat does nothing with immunity.
So you take the Poisoner feat because you're like, oh, heck yeah, my poison spray is going to be amazing now and bypass all of that nasty resistance. And then every monster you face is immune and you can't hurt them with your cantrip.
It's even more insulting because the 6 monsters that are resistant to poison damage, 2 of them are badgers.
2 of them. 2 of them are badgers.
So they're like challenge rating 0 badger.
There's like the badger and the giant badger.
The giant badger. And then the other ones are the Cambion and the Succubus, the Incubus, and the Assassin. So you can poison the Assassin who's trying to kill you. So yeah, like the fact that it's literally just 6.
So I'm taking Poison Spray, I'm taking Spell Sniper, I'm taking Poisoner, and as my epic character sets out on an adventure, we're going badger hunting.
Yeah. Yeah.
But assassins won't get me either.
So now the flip side of that is, I mean, it is worth noting that against the other 300 plus monsters in the Monster Manual that are not immune to poison damage, this is pretty good damage.
Yes.
And Spell Sniper would solve the range problem.
So I will say that the Poison Spray is actually a pretty decent cantrip right now. If you know the sorts of situations you're getting into and that you're not just facing a bunch of undead and stuff like that.
I know, and I think that's the problem is that it's not that there's over 100 monsters with poison immunity. It's that the sample size of the monsters with poison immunity happen to be some of the most popular and archetypal monsters in D&D because it includes virtually all undead.
We love undead. We love fighting undead. And so, you go into the crypt and you face skeletons on your first mission and you're a wizard who took poison spray as your damage cantrip. Like, sorry, run and hide. Like, you're useless.
It includes almost all demons and devils.
We love those too.
And then almost all constructs as well. In particular, it gets worse because a lot of these monsters are the monsters that are filling in the higher challenge ratings too.
Yeah.
So it might, it's totally great when you're fighting goblins.
So comparing this to Firebolt in terms of resistance and immunity, Firebolt does fire damage. Fire damage in the 2024 Monster Manual or 2025 Monster Manual has 47 monsters that are flat out immune to fire damage and 49 that are resistant. So more that are resistant than poison, because there's only 6 that are resistant to poison.
Making Elemental Adept actually useful.
Elemental Adept will get you past that.
Yeah.
And when it comes to flat out immunity, poison damage is over 100 monsters. Versus 47.
Yeah. So like on raw terms, right, there's more monsters are flat out immune to poison damage than the sum total of monsters that are both resistant and immune to fire damage.
Yeah.
Right. Again, fire damage is pretty common. The flip side of this is that there's actually over 20 monsters that are vulnerable to fire damage, which is worth noting, although again, a bunch of them are just like shrubs and plants. And there's also the corner cases of things like trolls that have their resistance shut off by fire.
Yeah.
That doesn't come up in like the fire vulnerability, their regeneration shut off by fire. So I think that like if you're looking at the comparison of poison spray to firebolt and looking at the elemental resistance and where you can get around things, that's the trade-off, because like strictly speaking, if you're shooting a goblin, poison spray is doing more damage to like
Yeah, the
goblins.
damage output is better on
Yeah,
poison spray,
yeah,
but in the grand scheme of a whole campaign, you're more likely to run into problems with poison spray almost twice as often
yeah.
as you are with
And
fire.
the poisoner feat is almost irrelevant,
Yeah,
whereas elemental adept fire
which is
will actually matter.
which is shocking. If when they
Yeah,
designed the poisoner feat, you would hope that they would see that there were only 6 monsters with resistance to poison and be like, "Oh, that's barely a stat to use." Like it should have in my opinion reduced immunity to resistance.
yeah,
Then it would have been
yeah,
super cool to take. Moving on, we have a few here that I think are kind of just okay. Starting with Ray of Frost. Ray of Frost is a decent cantrip. It does 1d8 damage and it reduces the target speed by 10 feet. I think that Ray of Frost is cool. It does a little bit, that's cool. It does a little bit less damage than Firebolt, but I like taking Ray of Frost if I'm sick of doing fire damage and I'm building a character that's like frosty and
yeah.
does like, then Ray of Frost is my go-to. And I will never bat an eye at somebody choosing Ray of Frost instead of Firebolt. I'm like, cool. Slowing enemies is actually a pretty cool thing to do. So it's an okay pick in my books.
Yeah, and I think that Ray of Frost kind of also falls into that broad category of like the minor debuff cantrips. Like I would include Vicious Mockery in here, which is another fun cantrip, only for bards. There's also Sacred Flame and Shocking Grasp, and the new Starry Wisp, which is available for druids. There's also Produce Flame. Like there's this kind of like fat middle of D8 damage cantrips that kind of do like some other minor thing.
Yeah, and each
Yeah,
of them have something cool. Like Starry Wisp shuts down invisibility. It
yeah.
causes like illumination, which I think is a really cool addition. Sacred Flame, that's the one that you don't even need to worry about cover, right? Like you can kind of just
Yeah,
like
yeah, and I mean it's kind of your cleric's go-to
yeah.
anyways. It's the main option that you have as a cleric. Now, another cantrip that was added in here, speaking of D8s and D12s, Toll the Dead.
So Toll the Dead has always been one of my favorite spells, and I really like that it got added in here into the player's handbook. Simply, Toll the Dead does it's 1d8 normally, but then if the target is wounded, basically not at maximum hit points, it does 1d12 instead.
Yeah, and I think that if you're looking to just hit hard and you don't mind the wisdom saving throw, that's the downside of Toll the Dead. Is that
Yes,
it's a wisdom
wisdom.
save, and wisdom saves are relatively strong on targets. It's necrotic damage. I I think that like the kind of the package of what Toll the Dead offers, partnered with another cantrip, I feel like you're kind of in business.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There is also like Thorn Whip, I think is okay
I love Thorn Whip
for its movement.
because of the forced movement.
Yeah.
It's one of the most significant bits of forced movement, although its range is very short.
Another cantrip that was added into the game for sorcerers is Sorcerous Burst.
This is a very exciting and cool cantrip because it does 1d8 damage, and you get to choose at the time of casting what damage type you want to make out of it.
You could choose out of the list of available options. There's like a couple that aren't in there, like Radiant and Force.
Yeah, you can't. Radiant Force and Necrotic aren't on the list,
Right.
but Thunder and Psychic and Poison all are.
Yeah.
Right, making this, I think, an excellent choice for any kind of dragon sorcerer.
So what I love about this is like again we have this like huge list of D8 cantrips that do something extra, but the great thing about Sorcerous Burst is we'll talk about the extra thing it does. But I think the main reason why you take Sorcerous Burst is because while we're talking about cantrips and dealing with immunities and resistances, Sorcerous Burst doesn't have that issue. You just
Yeah,
choose the damage type that's needed. If the creature has a vulnerability, you're great. If it has a resistance, choose something different.
yeah.
Like you can actually play into exactly what's needed in that situation. And I actually think that versatility makes Sorcerous Burst one of the better picks here.
It's actually worth noting because there's only 2 monsters in the entire monster manual that are actually vulnerable to radiant damage. There's a lot of monsters that have like undead that have some sort of like the troll, they have a regeneration that is shut off by radiant damage, so that's kind of the difference there. but there's also nothing that is vulnerable to force damage.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's things that are force damage is the only thing that will hurt them. But I think that one of the most effective things to use against them. So the key thing I think about Sorcerous Burst is the exploding die. This is the thing that I think excites people because when you roll an 8 for a damage die with Sorcerous Burst, you get to roll it again, and you can roll a maximum number of additional dice equal to your spellcasting ability modifiers.
If you happen to just keep getting 8s, which is possible.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways that this can work. So first of all, it does 1d8 to start. It scales up. So if you're a level 11 character and you're rolling 3d8s and you happen to roll all 8s on that first additional roll, and then you roll 3 more 8s, it can keep going, but only to a maximum extra number of dice as your spellcasting ability modifier.
Yeah. If you're the luckiest roller in the world, though, you get a massive cantrip.
Yes. And I think another interesting thing about this is because critical hits double the number of dice that you roll. So if you crit with Sorcerous Burst, you're rolling 8d. You're roll like you're a 17th level character. You're rolling 8d8 on the initial roll. So your odds of rolling another 8 somewhere in there are a lot higher.
Now, something to keep in mind about the exploding 8s. First of all, the term exploding 8s, we kind of borrowed from Warhammer. They have exploding 6s in that.
Exploding dice has been a game mechanic in tons of
Some
games.
people might be like, what do you mean my dice are going to explode? And
it means that you roll the maximum number, so you roll it again.
Yeah. But the big thing here is that a lot of people read this on paper, me included. When I first saw the spell, I was like, oh my God, the amount of damage I'm going to do.
Oh, yeah, because you can use Heroic Inspiration to reroll.
You can, yeah.
And you can use the Sorcerer Meta Magic Empowered spell to reroll. So if you roll the dice and you roll at least 1 8 and you're like, oh, I rolled a 1 and 2. Imagine that good, amazing feeling of like re-rolling the 1 into an 8 that then rolls into another 8. Like,
yeah.
This is the spell that, like, if you like to gamble a bit.
And this is where that meta magic to reroll really comes into play. Like, it's going to be so useful on Sorcerous Burst. But in general, I would say if you're not a gambler, don't get your hopes up that you're going to be hitting those exploding 8s all the time. It's actually a pretty low percentage chance.
Well, here's what it boils down to. So this is one of the few areas where I think that this kind of analysis, it's lovely to have some AI tools to help us with this math, because there's a lot of dice math tools that are out there that are really useful. And so if you actually run exploding dice through a dice math site, I like any dice, but you can ask ChatGPT to do these things too. What you actually find is that if we're rolling 3d8 and we factor in critical hits, we factor in that could increase the number of dice that we roll in 1 in 20 times. It turns out that the average damage of 3d8 with exploding 8s is still lower than 3d10.
So Firebolt still comes out ahead of Sorcerous Burst, even factoring in the exploding 8s.
Yes. So the average result of a 1d8 exploding is 5.14. The average result of 1d10 is 5.5. So Sorcerous Burst occasionally does this thing where it does a crazy amount of damage. But on average, across an entire campaign, you would have done more damage with Firebolt, like in absolute terms. But this spikiness is the weird thing, because the spikiness is where it sometimes is what matters.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's fun. It's fun to let the dice spike for you. Like there's a fun element, and if you do like gambling, like this is a really fun cantrip.
And that's the whole thing with the burst damage, right? Is that, you know, if we're thinking about a cantrip as your backup spell that you're using to hopefully finish off monsters once your big spell is doing the work, right? It's like sometimes if I'm wanting to end an encounter, am I better to go for the thing that is reliably on average going to do 1 or 2 points damage more? Or am I better to have that thing that Yeah, it's probably going to do 1 or 2 damage less,
but it could blow
but it
up.
could just blow up.
Also, again, I want to point out, I know we already talked about it, but bringing it back to the versatility of this cantrip, I think is
Yeah.
actually the selling point that makes it still, in my opinion, a better choice than Firebolt, because
Mm,
it might do 1 to 2 damage less on average, but I can change its damage type and it could do a lot more.
yeah.
I do want to point out something, though, that was interesting that Monty and I found out while we were researching the origins of the development of this spell. It became immediately obvious when I read it, but it didn't occur to me beforehand that a lower die actually has a better chance of
Yeah,
exploding.
so in the Unearthed Arcanas, it started as a D6.
So originally, people
Yeah.
were saying, what if this spell had started as 2d6 and then gone up from there?
Yeah.
And 2d6 would have been,
Then gone to 3d6, 40, like, just
yeah,
had an extra d6 to just give it more chance to explode.
I think it's fine, like, it's fair where it is,
Yeah.
but boy, would it have been fun to have those
Yeah.
sixes exploding all the time.
Yeah, it's a tricky spell. It's a really tricky spell, and I do think that the X factor with the spell comes down to critical hits. And remember, it's on a sorcerer that now they have the innate sorcery to give them advantage on their attack rolls with their spells. So sorcerers also have a higher crit chance
Yeah.
innately. I think that, again, empowered spell could be a factor here. The fact that you can reroll with horror. So mathematically speaking, if you're asking the question, like, when is it worth gambling on the reroll? It's actually worth it for any die under a 5. So if you roll 5 or less on an individual D8, it's potentially worth rerolling to
So
to fish for the 8.
overall, I do think Sorcerous Burst makes my top charts. I think
Yeah,
that it's a great cantrip. Moving on to, I think, one of the biggest topics that we have to
I
discuss
think this
today.
is the biggest glow up
Uh,
of the cantrips.
Yeah,
Yeah.
is True Strike. So True Strike now, when you cast it, it allows you to make a weapon attack as part of the action you took to cast it, and for that weapon attack, you get to use your spellcasting ability modifier
Yeah.
to make the attack. So
And add that
and
modifier to the damage
and
roll.
add it to your damage
Yeah.
roll. So it's both adding to your attack and damage roll. So if you are a charisma based caster or intelligence or whatever you are, you don't need to attack with strength or dexterity. You can use True Strike to attack now with your spellcasting ability. And it's not limited to melee attacks.
No, it's usable with any weapon. Now, notably, this isn't turning it into a spell attack. So if you're not using a weapon that you're not proficient in using, you don't add your proficiency modifier to the attack. That would make it even better because you could then use a heavy crossbow as a little wizard, and that would be ridiculous. But no, you
You
can
need proficiency
you
to
need
make this
proficiency.
work.
So you can use this to stab people with short swords and daggers and swords and quarterstaffs and all that good stuff. But you can also just pick up a light crossbow.
Light crossbow is available to a lot of different people, and it's pretty useful here because
Yeah.
the thing that's amazing about True Strike to keep in mind, that actually makes it pull ahead of most other cantrips, is most cantrips are a set amount that is determined by the dice. You
Yeah.
don't add anything to them. It's just your dice. Whereas weapon attacks add an ability modifier to a set die
Yeah.
roll. This is adding your best ability modifier to a die roll, which already then pushes it ahead of most cantrips, including Eldritch Blast for everybody who isn't a warlock, which is hard to do, but um, because yeah, even with Eldritch Blast, which does amazing amounts of damage, you're still getting to add a set number
Yeah.
to a die roll.
Yeah. And so with True Strike, if you're using it with a light crossbow or any D8 weapon, and you start off with a 16 modifier, its average damage is 7.5 damage, which is already well ahead of Firebolt. If you're using it with a melee weapon, it's going to be well ahead of Chill Touch and Shocking Grasp as well. Notably, True Strike is going to scale as well, so it gets an extra D6 damage whenever the cantrip scales up, which keeps it ahead of Firebolt in like it it is right at par with Firebolt that is an 11th level character, and Firebolt only pulls slightly ahead when you are a 17th level character. But then you also have to factor onto this. If you happen to be in a campaign with higher levels and you find a magic item that happens to do extra damage on a hit, it stacks that together too, and it adds that to the accuracy. So if you just happen to find a +3 light crossbow and have your ability score maxed out, you now have a cantrips that benefits from that,
Mm-hmm.
and also turns all that on, which is the thing that, yes, you can have cantrips that benefit from an implement that adds to the attack roll, but rarely the damage.
Yeah. Another cool thing about True Strike is that you can turn it into radiant damage as well. And there's only 2 monsters vulnerable to radiant damage. There are 11 that are resistant and 3 that are immune.
Yeah, so
But
Radiant's
those are
up
all
there with Force.
yeah, those are all pretty low numbers considering
Yeah.
the 500 plus monsters we have. So I think that True Strike is the best glow up in the game and is now in the realm of the best damage dealing cantrip.
The one thing that I will say that I think it loses on is, I remember playing earlier editions of D&D, particularly 3rd edition, before cantrips were infinite use.
Mm-hmm.
And you would always have that low-level wizard thing where I remember playing my 3rd edition wizard at like 1st and 2nd level, and the best thing that I could do with that wizard in combat after I'd used one of my 2 spell slots was to plink away with my little crossbow. And I don't know, that's the only thing about it, is that if you're using True Strike as a spellcaster, you're now picking up and shooting with a crossbow. It doesn't feel very spellcastery.
It feels good on a bard.
Yeah.
It feels good on, you could use this on like a warlock or a paladin, or, I mean, you need access to True Strike. Some of
Yeah.
these don't have access to True Strike. Ranger,
Yeah.
if you
Again,
did a certain build.
yeah.
But, there are ways to...
And it doesn't work with extra attacks. So I feel like for a lot of actual melee combatant characters, unless you have that use a cantrip as part of your attack action, you're not going to want to give up extra attack.
True.
Yeah.
I do think though that like there are you could use your imagination. You can design a wizard or a sorcerer who has a crossbow and make them cool.
Oh yeah, you absolutely can. I actually remember the gunslinger wizard that I played in your pirate campaign, and this would have been perfect for that character.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, it would have been actually amazing. Especially because that was a divination wizard in True Strike's a divination cantrip. It would have all fit perfectly. But actually, I love that character too. Overall, though, what are your top picks now for cantrips?
So looking at all of the cantrips, let's each pick 3, and then I think that'll land us with probably somewhere close to the 5 best damage dealing cantrips right now. For me, depending on the character I'm playing, I think I'm still going with Eldritch Blast if I'm a warlock.
If you can take Eldritch Blast, take Eldritch Blast.
True Strike if I'm not a warlock.
Yeah.
And Acid Splash if that's my other option. I actually think that Acid Splash is a nice little AoE, is like my 3rd pick.
I agree with Sorcerous Burst, and I think that for their respective classes, Sorcerer and Warlock, you should take your kind of class unique cantrip. I think basically everyone else that can take True Strike should take True Strike. It's interesting to think though that like it's kind of weird because where we're at with cantrips now in 2024, druids have unique cantrips like Shillelagh and Thorn Whip. Clerics have unique cantrips like Thaumaturgy and
Sacred
Flame. Sorcerers now have Sorcerous Burst as their unique cantrip. Warlocks have always had Eldritch Blast.
Bards have Vicious
Mockery. The wizard actually doesn't have a cantrip that is uniquely wizard. It feels like
they should get something. They should get wizard magic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's weird that it's not even a cantrip, but like they need something that's like magic missile-ish, because like that always felt wizardy to me.
Yeah.
It's just like they just need magic.
Yeah.
Um, but okay, here's the interesting thing. We had two of the same pick, and then I picked Acid Splash and you picked Sorcerous Burst, which I agree Sorcerous Burst is probably one of my favorites. So I think if we were to give a top five for like what are the best damage dealing cantrips right now, the other one to add in here is Firebolt because it's your go-to.
I think
So Eldritch
Eldritch
Blast,
Blast and Sorcerous Burst, if you can take them.
then you have
True Strike, Firebolt,
Firebolt,
and Acid
Acid
Splash.
Splash.
If you're just going for trying to hit the right circumstances.
Yeah.
I do think that for most characters, Firebolt is almost pushed off the list entirely. Like
Yeah.
I feel like if I was making like a wizard and I was picking my two damage dealing cantrips, I feel like Acid Splash and True Strike are going to cover you
Yeah.
for 99% of situations.
And honestly, like
And then at that point, I think you would want to pull in Mind Sliver.
Mind Sliver's also
Yeah.
very high on my list. Mind Sliver, I actually, for damage dealing, no, but you're actually right. Maybe I would replace Firebolt with Mind Sliver in my top five. I think that Mind Sliver's such a useful
Yeah,
and good cantrip.
that's the whole thing is that I think that when you're looking back at Firebolt in comparison to what else is out there,
I even like Toll the Dead more.
yeah, I do too. And I just think that the attack roll, like for me in general, when my character's defaulting down to cantrips, I just want to get some reliable damage in,
Yeah.
and that's where Mind Sliver feels different because it feels like a setup spell for another spell.
Right.
Whereas if my wizard is concentrating on hypnotic pattern or wall of force, and I've done everything that I need to do, and I just want to put some damage on the board, I feel like True Strike is probably my best option.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Whereas the other cantrips, like I think it's a similar case with the Sorcerer and Sorcerous Burst. Like, as a Sorcerer, once you put out your big concentration spell, you've done your big flashy thing, Sorcerous Burst is your decent fallback on. Whereas Eldritch Blast feels like a different kettle of fish here because Eldritch Blast actually feels like the game plan.
Yeah, the game plan for Warlocks is usual, although there is still the play of like you drop the concentration spell and then you start blasting.
Yeah.
But like that's the whole thing with Warlocks. Like that's always their thing. But it's not that different from like a wizard dropping their big thing and Firebolt.
But that's generally the
Strike.
gameplay loop with spellcasters in 5e, whether it's 2014 or 2024. It is like you put down your big concentration spell, you decide if you want to blow more spell slots on something more aggressive, like you want to throw some fireballs around or manipulate the field with like Dimension Door or something like that. And then if you got nothing else, it's throw a cantrip.
I also, this might just be at our table because you tend to throw monsters at us that I can't immediately tell what I'm fighting. Sometimes I start with a cantrip on my first round because it's me testing the waters.
Oh, it's the probe to see how tough are you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I blast it with like my character has Eldritch Blast, so if I blast it with all 4 beams of Eldritch Blast, and you're like it died, then I'm like okay, I can not blow big spells.
Do you think that Firebolt gets a little bit back because it can actually start fires?
So Firebolt does have the ability to start fires, and although fire is one of the most resisted damage types, it's also one of the most vulnerable damage types. So kind of two sides of the coin there.
And because Firebolt very explicitly can set objects on fire and cause the burning hazard.
Yeah.
Right?
So, I mean, Firebolt is still, I think, a benchmark. It is still, there's a reason why we bring up Firebolt so much. It is like...
Is it better than Firebolt? Because I think that Firebolt doesn't get the top 5 for me because it is the gatekeeper. It is the one that says, "Are you better than me?" Then yeah, you can.
You get to go into the top club.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that overall there's only a few duds here.
No, I don't think that, like, I think in a lot of cases you're restricted by class, but also in a lot of cases you aren't, because like it's so much easier now for anybody to take Magic Initiate.
But it's still hard to get Eldritch Blast.
It's still hard to get Eldritch Blast.
But True Strike, you can find a way to get.
Yeah.
So what are your favorites? We've talked a lot about, we went through all of them, but I think it was pretty obvious what the highlights are, and then we talked about our highlights at the end. But are there other cantrips that you think we undersold? Maybe you think that slowing people down with Frost Ray of Frost is the best move in the game, and I'm not going to argue with you on that. I want to hear about what do you think the strongest cantrips are looking at the 2024 rules. Tell us about that in the comments below.
The videos that we make on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. Our patrons get some really cool rewards, including access to our patron-only Discord server, early access to all of our YouTube videos a week before they air here on the channel, and at our top tiers, they get access to our Eldritch Experiments, which is a monthly packet of new material compatible with 5e, whether 2014 or 2024, of rules, content, and materials like subclasses, spells, feats, and other cool adventure hooks, stuff like that Kelly and I are working on for future books. Our patrons get them way before they ever will make it into one of our published books and get to test it out, try it, tell us what they think. So if that's of interest to you, sign up to our Patreon. The links are down below.
And if you want to see a ton of Eldritch blasting going on, you can check out our actual play in the Worlds of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings right here on YouTube. You can check out all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we got plenty more coverage on the new rules right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. See you next time in
the dungeon.